This might be the most ambitious thing I've ever tried to make. What if I tried to build a completely custom canvas that's three-dimensional, filled with multiple miniature paintings? I want to challenge every creative skill I have: woodworking, painting, composition, and storytelling, all into one giant project. And it all starts with this. 7 years ago, this younger artist was just painting landscapes and still lifes, but I was eager to try something that would truly challenge me. So I came up with this, my very first portrait painting. Since this very painting, portraits have been the heart of my work. And now I'm ready to come back 7 years later and recreate this with everything I've learned since. We'll dig more into the original painting later, but first we need to get some supplies. And to do that, we gotta head back to February of this year. And to start, we need to get some premium wood.
That's what she said.
And for our first roadblock, the infamous Home Depot lane closure. After waiting 15 minutes with no one around, I took matters into my own hand and instantly got yelled at. But it was all for nothing. Every piece of hobby wood was warped, bowed, twisted, or chipping. That didn't go well at all. There's another place across the street. We'll go check there. And as you can tell from my reaction, we had the same result here. Weird in here. Never see anybody. Nobody here. Like, nobody fucking here. Well, that was a huge failure. Not too sure what to do because there's no other places really in my town that sell plywood. I don't know if I should use a different material or see if there's some other places around my town. I'll just have to go and look. I called a few lumber places and either they didn't sell plywood or I got no answer. This project seemed like I was destined to fail before I even got started. There was, however, one last place I hadn't checked. Rona Plus. Honestly, I have no idea why my town has two Ronas less than 5 kilometers apart, and I'm still trying to figure out what the plus even means, but if they got wood, it's worth a shot. I headed to the plywood section for the same results. I then beelined it to why I was really here. There we go. And that's when I found these project panels. Now, I don't know why I didn't think about this before because I actually did a painting on this guy last year. This should work and should get the job done. I grabbed this one, and then I found this handy panel that's kind of the same. I'm hoping this will work for what else I have planned for this. Now, I did get a little bit lucky, and I was able to find a 1/4-inch plywood that is relatively straight. This one doesn't have to be perfectly flat because I'm going to be doing something a little bit unique with this one that you'll see shortly. We're going to start by tracing out some shapes on these pieces of wood. For this, I'll be using some transfer paper and a pen to transfer the image. Transfer paper is basically just charcoal on a paper, and when you press on it, it leaves an imprint on the surface behind it. It's about -11 here in Canada right now. I should probably think about doing these projects in the summer next time. Didn't really think that through, but let's just see how this goes. My first few cuts resulted in a lot of splintering, so I tried an old trick of using tape around where I want to make my cuts. This worked significantly better. Okay, so I've got these cut out. I'm gonna come in and start sanding, and that's where the problems have started. Let me show you. Okay, so this was the sander I was going to use, and when I picked it up to move it, I somehow managed to snap that off. So that's the first problem. I don't know if that's that bad. I might be able to fix this. I don't know what happened. When I bought it initially, I always make sure that it's nearly perfectly flat. I mean, if you remember, that was the whole reason why I went with this, was because it was flat. I might be able to fix it. I've never fixed a warp before. So, I mean, we're this far in, so I might as well try. So after cutting and sanding as close as I could to the edge, I was about 1/4 of an inch off in some areas I couldn't get to, so I needed to come in with some finer tools. And to be completely honest with you, this was definitely as painful as it sounds. And now to tackle that warp. To do this, I simply wet the side that was bowing, flipped it over, put a ton of weight on it, and let it sit overnight. So yes, did I go through all the trouble to find a flat piece of wood to only have to then flatten that piece of wood? Yeah. Well, it's been sitting for about a day. Let's see if this did anything. And hell yeah, it did. So let's get on with those finishing touches. Every last piece got a final hand sanding to make sure it felt just right. However, things were going just a little too well. Alright, so I'm feeling pretty defeated. I have finally got this flat. I spent another couple hours yesterday sanding it, and I come down today to do the next step in the prep, and we got cupping again. I think I know what's happening. With the temperature outside, it being so cold, the wood is basically adapting to that temperature out there while I'm sanding it, and then as I bring it inside to get it acclimatized to my studio, that's when it's sort of, I guess, relaxing and that cupping is happening. I'm just a bit frustrated because I felt like I've spent a week wrestling with this thing. I'm gonna try and flatten it one more time, and then after that, I basically have to make a decision. I really like this shape. I really want this to work. So I'm hoping I can get that fixed. Please work. Nice. Finally, I got a flat piece of wood and I can move on to filling these imperfections. For this, I just mix up some of the sawdust that I used when I was sanding this piece and a little bit of wood glue and slap that in the holes. I'm hoping that I'll be able to save some of these butterflies that split when I was cutting them with this method as well. I then traced where I wanted this elevated layer to sit, slapped some wood glue on there, and clamped it down overnight for it to dry. All right, so finally we're ready to move on to the next step. We've got the elevated layer glued on. I basically just need to come in, super quick sanding of all those fill-in spots, do it on these guys as well, and then I can get to sealing the wood. For sealing the wood, I use something from TriArt called Polymer Medium Gloss. Basically what this does is it's gonna seal the wood off to stop any moisture from getting in there, and it's gonna give a really good tooth and really good base for my gesso to grab onto. And we need to do about 3 to 4 coats of it, so we got a lot of work ahead of us. So let's get this all prepped and let's keep moving forward. This is by far the most important step when you're working with wood. Failure to do this would result in all sorts of problems like warping, cracking, and discoloration. Some stuff that may not even happen for years down the road. So please, if you're working with wood, make sure you seal it. I did about 4 layers of this polymer medium, leaving anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour in between coats. So this has been dry for about 48 hours now, and it's ready to be primed or gessoed. I'm gonna come on with some very fine sandpaper and get rid of some of the high areas. Don't worry, I'm not gonna bore you with any of that footage. But yeah, basically, we're getting that much closer to putting paint on panel. For the gesso, I prefer a more grayish tint to the traditional pure white. To do this, I simply add the gesso with a little bit of Ivory Black to make a nice neutral gray color. Now, I've been using a roller to apply gesso for years now, as it leaves very little artifacts compared to using a brush. I really prefer it on portraits because it gives this very subtle texture that's very similar to skin. These first few layers of the prep, I like to imagine, are like the foundation of your house. No matter how big or beautiful your house may be, it is truly only as strong as the foundation. I really take my time to make sure I give each layer the proper drying time and apply multiple coats to get a really solid finish. After the gesso is cured, it's time for the last sanding to remove any imperfections and create a nice solid flat surface. So now we're going to stain these panels. For that, I'm going to be using TriArt's Burnt Umber Acrylics. If you're interested in getting your own, I will have links down in the description, as well as a complete list of all the materials I used today. For this stain, I'm going to be toning this panel. If you're new here, it's something I do on all my panels to get a more neutral background. So you do a little bit of stain of this. I'm going to show you how I do that. So let's get right into it. If you're an artist who hasn't stained your canvases or panels before, please just do it. There's something about the pure white that feels aggressive, like the surface is challenging you from the first brushstroke. Pure white is not a common color you find naturally in nature, and when you do, there's only like small blotches of it. For my stain, I like to use a watered down burnt umber acrylic and wipe away the excess to give the painting a natural but unique textured surface. These paintings will be an absolute nightmare to make a frame for, so I'm painting the sides of the wood in a carbon black. This is something I do on all my paintings to give it a sort of fake framed look, but honestly, in this case, it's 100% necessary. There's no way I'm finding frames for these. Some people like to do this at the end. I like to do this now, as there's no risk of me getting overpainting onto a finished piece. Anything I could do to make my life less stressful adds a few extra hours to my overall lifespan. All right, here we are. The wood's been cut, it's been sanded, it's been sealed, it's been primed, it's been stained, the border's been put on. We are finally ready to start the next process. I'm gonna do a light sketch on here, and then we're gonna get right into doing the underpainting. It's cool to see these pieces of wood finally come to shape. I'm very excited to get some paint on here, so let's jump right into that. There's this bit of advice I heard years ago, that you should never show people the reference material of your painting if you don't have to. It's because once they've seen it, they can't unsee it. They'll always be comparing the final version to the rough draft or reference you showed them earlier. And in a way, it takes some of the magic out of it, like I'm pulling back the curtain during a magic trick. I used to feel weird about that. Like, why wouldn't I show every step? That's the point of a process video, right? But over time, I started to understand there's value in a little mystery, in letting the final painting stand on its own without forcing the viewer to compare to the reference. And sure, if you're doing commission work or you're submitting a draft to get a job, that's a little bit different. Saying, you know, I don't do drafts, you just have to trust me, won't get you many jobs, believe me. But sometimes you will get those jobs where the client does trust you. And believe me, the look on their faces when they see the finished product for the first time is always magical. Instead of inspecting the painting to match the draft and make comparisons, they're taken on a journey and exploring the painting for the first time. To be honest, when I first started this project, I was having a hard time figuring out how I would mount these individual butterflies. Turns out double-sided tape works fantastic for it. Alright, so now we're ready to do the underpainting. I'm going to be using the same paint that I used to do the stain on this panel. I'm going to be using the burnt umber, and then I'm going to be introducing a little bit of titanium white into it. This is going to be a value layer. So it's going to be all monochromatic. We're just going to be focusing on all the values, the shapes. I'm going to expand off my sketch, and I'm going to create a better roadmap for me to follow as I get into the oil painting process. But let's not try and get too far ahead of ourselves. We got to get this layer done, so let's jump right into it. It is now time to finally put some paint on this panel. It may only be one color, but we gotta start somewhere. The underpainting is where I take that initial sketch and start to add my own flair and break out from the lines. Now, one thing I didn't fully think through was how much of a shadow this three-dimensional panel would cast. So I had to get a little creative on this one on how to light up those dark areas so I could actually see what I was painting. If you were to think of painting like building a house, the initial sketch would be like the blueprint. It's where I figure out the overall structure, the proportions, layout, where everything goes. It doesn't have to be perfect. I can erase, make adjustments, and use tools to assist. But it just helps me plan the big picture before I commit to anything permanent. Just like the blueprint, the sketch gives me a sense of directions and what I'm going to need to create the image. So if the sketch is the blueprint, the underpainting is the foundation and the framing of the house. It's where things start to feel real. The structure is going up, and I'm making decisions that everything else will sit on top of. It's monochromatic, which makes it easier to focus on value without worrying about color yet. It's like framing the walls without thinking about where the sofa is going to go or where we're going to hang the TV. I truly love it because it's like a practice run of the entire painting. It's just a simplified version, and I can tackle difficult decisions early without getting caught up in my palette. I can push and pull or exaggerate my proportions. And even though I'll paint over most of this, some of it will show through in the final layer. That's the beauty of it. If I do this part right, it adds an immense sense of depth and cohesion that will hold everything together. One could argue that this is too much of an underpainting. Like, there's a lot of detail going into something that's technically going to get painted over anyway. And yeah, I'd agree. But here's the thing. The more I've painted, the more I've learned that when something isn't working later on, it almost always traces back to this stage, the underpainting. Weird proportions, I probably thought I could fix it later. Accidentally gave her 2 chins, turns out cake day was every day. So yeah, it's extra effort now, but it's insurance for later on. Also, this part's just fun. There's no pressure of color, no second guessing whether the mix was too warm or too cool. I just find it so easy to get into the flow state painting with just one color, so I tend to get lost in the moment at this stage. And don't get me wrong, I do simple underpaintings, but just not for portraits. For portraits, I'm not at the skill level to where I can just throw down a few shadows and highlights, then just jump right into the painting. So yeah, maybe I'm overdoing this underpainting a bit, but here's the thing. If the values aren't working, no amount of color is going to save a painting. At this point, I sort of felt like I was painting in a factory. Painting 14 individual butterflies that are all very similar could easily become tedious work. But for this piece to really work, I needed to give each butterfly the same level of care and attention as the main subject. That's something I think the original painting was completely missing, with only 2 butterflies. The idea was there, but it just felt incomplete. Okay, time for some palette prep. This is where I take all the colors from my initial palette, mix the main values from dark to light, and arrange them in a way that is oh so satisfying. Let's jump in and I'll I'll show you how I do it. So we're going to start off by loading my palette with some fresh paint. And no, I won't be using any of this alizarin crimson, but the footage looked good, so I left it in. I'm going to be doing this painting using a very common palette called the Zorn palette, of which is comprised of Ivory Black, Yellow Ochre, Cadmium Red Lite, and Titanium White. From here, I will be arranging my palette into what we call color zones. For example, arranging all the warm colors I'll be using from the darkest to the lightest value. To be fully transparent, I tend to mix way too many gradations in this step. My only real punishment for doing this, however, is how long it takes for me to do it, so I'll probably never learn. I then take the paint from my mixing palette and load it onto my painting palette and arrange it in a way that is oh so satisfying. And this is where you catch me cheating. I am in fact using some Ultramarine Blue, which of course is not a part of the infamous Zorn palette. Now, I could go down the rabbit hole of which some art historians make the case that they believe Anders Zorn, the creator of the Zorn palette, did use some blue in his paintings in order to justify my decision to use blue. But, quite frankly, this is my painting, and I want some blue-greens, so I'm going to add some blue and still call it the Zorn palette. Either way, the palette is ready, the paint is buttery, and as a result, the glamour shots are a non-negotiable. After finding the wood, cutting it, sanding it, sealing it, priming it, staining it, doing my underpainting, and getting all the color mixing done, I'm finally ready to start putting some oil paint on this panel. For you guys, it's been a matter of minutes. For me, it's been a matter of weeks. In fact, we're probably going on 2 months at this point. There's always a question of where to start. And when I have that question, there's always one thing I like to do, and it's eat the frog first.
Boy, you sure are crazy.
What I mean by that is we're going to tackle the hardest thing first, the portrait, the most important thing of the painting first. I want to procrastinate, but all that's left to do is put paint on brush on board. So without further ado, let's just get started. But before that first brush stroke, I want to take you back to where this all started. This was my very first portrait, painted 7 years ago. Back then, I hit a wall. I really wanted to get into portraiture, but I just couldn't figure out how to draw eyes. Every attempt felt off, and it was really holding me back from doing any portrait work. So I came up with a workaround. What if I just didn't paint the eyes? That's when the idea came up to just cover the eyes with butterflies, and I just ran with it. I added some clouds behind her face, kind of just because it felt right. But what this really did was give me the confidence to just go forward and make the portrait. Otherwise, if I just kept thinking I can't paint eyes or whatever it may be, I never would have done this. I've kept this painting in my studio ever since because it reminds me you really can do whatever you want as long as you get a little creative with it. Now, I want to revisit this painting 7 years later with all the skills I've learned and the meaning that this painting has given me over the past years hanging in my studio and bring them into a new version that reflects everything I've learned ever since this very first portrait. My philosophy has always been that you should start with the most difficult task first. Usually, when you first start a project, you have the highest amount of energy and, more important, enthusiasm towards that project. This is incredible fuel to deal with all the frustrations, anxiety, and emotions that come with a difficult task. But when it comes to painting, it also has an added benefit. Once I'm done with that particularly difficult section, I get to live with it for the rest of the painting process. This means I get the pleasure of enjoying watching a painting emerge around that section, but more importantly, I get to study what I did right and what I did wrong. What I can tell you from my years of experience is it's much easier at the end of a painting to touch up some difficult areas than it is to try and paint, problem solve, and resist the urge to throw out the entire painting so close to the finish line because you saved the most difficult task for last. Now, this philosophy does have some exceptions. I almost always follow the rule of working back to front, meaning I paint the furthest things away first, then gradually moving forward. It prevents overlapping, of which this is a perfect example.
Whoops.
I now have to touch up these already completed lips because I was too eager to tackle them early. It's all about respecting the back to front rule and eating my frog for breakfast to keep my momentum alive, hopefully before things start to fall apart. You would think painting back to front I would start with the background, but I got a special trick up my sleeve, so you'll have to stick around and see why I save it for later. One thing I knew I had to fix for my original painting was the clouds. In my original piece, they're out of perspective and lacking a real sense of depth. I originally toyed with the idea that the clouds would be some sort of landscape, but after really thinking about it more, it felt like they needed to be coming out of a void, like the clouds were escaping, or perhaps a window into one's emotional state. Maybe it's stress, anxiety, or some sort of emotional turbulence. It's as if you could see a glimpse into what someone might be feeling if you could peel back the surface and see what's really going on. This neck and chest area of the painting isn't the focus, but it still deserves just as much care. You want this comfortable balance to where it's very accurate, but it's not distracting. In other words, I want this part of the painting to support the image, but not draw attention. To achieve this, I'm very loose with my brush, and as a result, it turns out somewhat abstract. I still tighten up where I need to, for example, this cast shadow on her neck, but overall, comparatively to the rest of the painting, this is very loose and abstract. All right, so everything's going pretty good, to be honest with you. The most difficult part of the painting is done. I'm happy with how the face turned out, how the clouds turned out. The neck and chest area look a little off right now, but this next phase is going to be probably the most transformative of the painting. I'm going to be doing the main color of the background and the hair all together at once. One of the main benefits of painting wet paint in the wet paint is that you're going to get these really smooth transitions. Now, the most dramatic change is going to happen when I paint these butterflies, but this is really going to start to bring this whole piece together. It's really going to add some shape and some dimension to it. So let's just hop right in and see what happens. When I originally came up with the idea to make this panel 3D, I knew I was going to introduce some interesting challenges with this painting. And this background was one of them. Finding a way to get your brush tucked in close to that raised edge with all the different curves and edges made a relatively simple task significantly more challenging. But what adds to the difficulty is how time sensitive this alla prima hair technique is. I have to get this done in one sitting, no exceptions. To achieve this effect, we're going to paint the entire background, making a conscious effort to paint over top of where the hair will be. This is a step where inaccuracy is important. As the background paint is still wet, we now proceed with the hair. Conveniently enough, with the paint still wet, it makes for an easy correction if needed. We start by blocking in the hair as we normally would. I could take advantage of our underpainting here. By playing around with my brush weight, I can make some areas more transparent than others, creating a ton of depth and volume in this area. But it's once we work towards that background, that's where the magic happens. Take a look. Now I grab my cheapest, stiffest, splayed brushes to really push this effect. With one drag of the brush, I instantly create multiple strands of hair, almost as if they were painted individually. The wet paint of the hair and background mix together so effortlessly to create this soft, delicate transition that is really only achievable this way. This is by far the greatest tool I've learned in the last 7 years. All right, so this is going really well. Knock on wood. All we really got left is to basically do some butterflies and some touch-ups. But I'm guessing you probably forgot about these. So I figured let's take a little break from the main portrait and get some practice on these pieces here so I can perfect my monarch butterflies before we tackle this piece. So let's put this off to the side and let's start cracking away on these guys. These butterflies are really individual paintings in their own right. Each has its own border, will have its own hanging hardware, and they'll all be displayed separately from the main piece. But here's the thing, there's 14 of them. So when it came time to paint them, I thought back to my childhood painting Warhammer miniatures and figured, why don't I try batch painting? Batch painting is a method where you paint multiple pieces at once. Instead of finishing one painting from start to finish, I tackle them like an assembly line. First, paint all the darks. Then I paint all the shadows. And honestly, it worked incredibly well. The butterflies stayed consistent from one to the next, and more importantly, my momentum never dropped. And just like that, 14 individual paintings done. I don't know why I didn't think about this sooner, but I should definitely have this down here. There. There. Remember earlier when I mentioned how it's a good practice to paint back to front? This is a perfect example of why. By painting the clouds first, I can come in after and cleanly lay in a solid edge over top. Now, don't let this steady hand fool you. I was terrified of messing this part up. Circles and artists have always had a bit of a love-hate relationship. When I first painted this image 7 years ago, the butterflies were just a clever solution, a way to avoid painting the eyes. I knew this time around I wanted to address that with more of them. Not for the sake of more is better, but to use them as a tool to help push the mood and setting of the piece. But over time, these butterflies have come to mean so much more to me. Looking back now, I realize they were never just hiding something. They were helping. Not only helping me create my first portrait, but also serving as a symbolic figure, gently lifting the subject out of something. I think that's why they've stuck with me all these years. They started as a workaround and became a kind of visual metaphor. In this updated version, I see them as saviors of a sort, lifting her from whatever emotional storm is brewing inside. A connection to nature maybe, something real, grounded. A reminder that even in this hyper-digital world, there's still beauty and clarity for oneself to be found in something as simple as nature. So after painting 26 butterflies and repainting more, wait, hold up, say that again, and repainting more. Okay, so we're back. Basically, to put this simply, after painting 20 plus butterflies, my recipe has gotten better. So luckily for me, that means redoing a lot of these. These ones being my first ones were really great tests, but I gotta make sure that they match the level of the final piece. So as much as I really hate going back and repainting stuff, I'm just gonna have to do it for this one. At least the cool thing is that you're gonna see some oiling out. So let's check that out. So essentially what oiling out does is it reactivates the surface of the painting and restores the painting's original gloss. This is usually done with linseed oil, but there are a number of other oils you can use. You see, as oil paint dries, some areas dry more matte and some areas dry more glossy. This inconsistency makes it incredibly hard to do accurate touch-ups. So by oiling out, I can see how the painting looked when I originally painted it and have an easier time matching the colors and values to do touch-ups. It's safe to say that oiling out has earned a spot in my toolbox. Alright, the touch-ups are done, everything is looking fresh again, now let's pick up where we left off. After painting 26 butterflies, I finally have one left to go. I'm not even sick of painting the butterflies, I'm just exhausted from it. This is it, last one. Best for last. This butterfly was always going to be the last one painted, partly because it makes sense technically. If we follow the rule of painting back to front, it's the closest element to the viewer and it also overlaps some of the more sensitive areas of the portrait, so it needed to come last. But of all the butterflies, it is the most dramatic shift from the original. Instead of covering both eyes, it just felt right to show what was underneath this time. Back then, that butterfly was a way to avoid painting something I wasn't confident in. Since then, I've painted a lot of portraits and a lot of eyes, and to be fair, this one's actually closed, so it's not exactly a huge technical leap. But still, It felt meaningful to show it this time, not just for the sake of the composition and storytelling, though it does add to both. More importantly, it's like a quiet little nod to that original painting. And so by saving this one for last, it's almost as though we're coming full circle and finishing where it all started. We're almost there. I got two last things to do. First, I've got to go around and retouch up some of the borders where I had some paint bleed over, and then we're ready for the varnish. It's been a long time coming, so let's tidy these borders up and let's get ready for some varnish. This is one of those final steps where you can slip or sneeze and completely ruin your months of hard work. And we're risking that to cover up some slight overpainting that you most likely will never have even seen or noticed. However, you're dealing with someone who has a lifelong battle with fighting perfectionism, and as a result, this is something I always do, even though it terrifies me. It does, however, give the painting a nice, crisp border. And since these paintings are going to be next to impossible to frame, I want to take the extra time and risk the 3 years I took off my life from stress just to give these that little bit extra perfectionism. Okay, here we are, the most exciting part of any painting, varnishing. Everything up to this point is done. After I put this varnish on, there's no turning back. I use Windsor and Newtons water mixable gloss varnish. I mainly use this just because it's a solvent-free varnish, so it's much safer for me in my little studio here. But enough procrastinating, let's go ahead, throw some of this varnish on there and see the beauty that lies beneath. Varnishing is a beautiful and terrifying step. You're filled with anxiety, worried if the paint is dry enough, if you're using too much varnish or not enough. Did you miss a spot? Did you overwork it? And yet, while all the worry swirls around you, something magical happens. The darks come back to life, restoring the richness and depth. The vibrant oranges and reds resaturate, adding warmth and energy. And that final coat ties everything together, unifying the entire painting into one finished surface. And this is where it all comes together. From finding the wood, cutting it, dealing with the warping, the sanding, to the underpainting, the palette prep, the butterflies, the retouching. This final layer is what seals it all in. The very last step that locks the entire painting in place. And as that final layer settles, so does the entire journey. The mistakes, the fixes, the touch-ups, they're all sealed in now, woven into every brushstroke. What started as a 1-month project has somehow turned into a 5-month-long journey, all from a warped piece of wood and a painting I made 7 years ago. And there you have it. The recreation of my original portrait is all finished. Now, before I show you the final sexy shots of this, I want to let you know that I've created prints of this. There's going to be multiple sizes available on my website, and you can head over to lukedurden.com to get your own prints. Links will be down in the description. Now, some of you may have noticed that I painted more butterflies than were actually in the final piece. And that's because I created duplicates, but only the best of the pair made it to the final painting. Those other ones, well, these are going to be available for sale on my website as well. So if you want a unique piece from this project, these will be available, but there's only 7 of them. So once they're gone, they're gone. So again, head down to my website, maybe check out some of these originals, get some prints, maybe get a t-shirt to show your support. Link will be down in the description. But without further ado, let's finish off with those final glamour shots.